April 12, 1944, 21,000 feet above the Dutch countryside. The night sky felt like an endless sheet of cold iron, silent except for the steady drone of German BMW engines carving through the darkness. A Ju-88 night bomber pressed on toward its target, its crew trusting the moonless sky the same way countless Luftwaffe crews had done for years. The navigator traced instruments glowing faintly red. The pilot adjusted throttle, feeling the vibration through his boots. The radio operator listened to static, relaxed, confident. Night had always belonged to them. Far below, the landscape was a patchwork of shadows. The bomber's crew saw nothing unusual. No searchlights swept the sky. No tracer fire climbed toward them. The air felt calm, almost serene, as if the darkness itself wrapped them in a cloak. For the Luftwaffe, these hours had long been the safest refuge. Allied fighters rarely ventured here after dusk. Interception required eyes, and the night had none to offer. But this night carried a quiet threat the Germans could not sense. In the distance, hidden in the black void beyond the bomber's tail, another set of engines throbbed with deeper resonance. The sound did not reach the German crew. The presence did not glimmer or silhouette against the clouds. The predator hunting them moved unseen, its instruments reaching into the dark for heat, motion, metal. Before the P-61 entered the war, American night defense relied on ground controllers, blind intercepts, and luck. Pilots strained their eyes, hoping for a glint of moonlight against an enemy fuselage. Too often, the Germans slipped past and disappeared. Tonight unfolded differently. Inside the unseen aircraft, pursuing the Ju-88, a new sensor probed the sky. The SCR-720 radar swept its beam across the gloom, capturing echoes that revealed shapes no human eye could find. The Ju-88's pilot leaned forward and scanned the windscreen. Nothing stirred. He felt the familiar comfort of flying inside a black tunnel, where only instruments told the truth. His gunner peered rearward, but saw only darkness. The bomber cruised steadily, confident, lulled by routine. Yet far behind them, a faint blip appeared on a rotating screen. A small pulse, a shape forming where none should be. The moment the radar operator in the pursuing aircraft saw it, the night changed. A silent thread now connected hunter to prey. The bomber had been found, though it still believed the darkness belonged to it. The radar operator in the P-61 Black Widow leaned closer to the glowing scope, the inside of his cramped compartment illuminated by the soft green sweep of the SCR-720. Staff Sergeant William Carter steadied his hands, adjusting the gain in range. The faint blip sharpened with every rotation. The system's electronic pulse painted the sky in invisible strokes, reading distances and headings with a precision no Allied night fighter had ever possessed before. In the forward cockpit, First Lieutenant Raymond Howell felt the vibrations of the twin Pratt and Whitney R. 2800 engines through the stick. The Black Widow moved with the weight of a heavy predator, yet responded with surprising agility. He kept the throttle steady, eyes flicking between his flight instruments and the featureless void outside. There was no moon, no horizon, only blackness. Carter's voice crackled through the intercom. "Contact holding steady, bearing 085, range closing." Howell acknowledged with a nod he knew Carter couldn't see. He eased the aircraft into a gentle turn, letting the P-61 sink slightly to adjust their intercept. Radiation from the radar washed out across the sky, searching, locking, clarifying. The German plane ahead still flew unaware. Inside the P-61, the sense of the unseen tightened like a drawn wire. Behind Howell, in the raised rear turret compartment, Corporal James Hill checked the elevation controls on his .450 caliber machine guns. He scanned the black dome of sky around him, though his sight meant nothing in this fight. The night had always been a realm of guesswork for gunners, but not tonight. Tonight, the eyes of the aircraft had no pupils. Carter recalibrated the azimuth and watched the blip crawl higher on the scope. Target slightly left, 2 miles, closing fast. Howell pushed the nose forward. The engines hardened their growl. Air shuddered against the Black Widow's broad wings. Somewhere beyond the dark, the Ju-88 maintained its slow confidence, cruising toward Allied lines under the belief that no enemy could track it without sight. But the P-61 was rewriting the rules in real time. Ground controllers monitored both aircraft from far below, but they were now secondary. For the first time in night fighting history, the fighter itself carried the senses of the entire pursuit. No flares, no searchlights, no guesswork. The radar provided everything Howell needed. "Range 1.5, Carter said, voice tightening, not from fear, but focus. "Target maintaining speed, no evasive movement." Hill steadied himself. Sweat collected under his helmet despite the cold. The quiet intensity of hunting an enemy who had no idea you existed created a tension unfamiliar even to veteran crews. Howell trimmed the controls and pushed the throttles to climb slightly. The P-61 banked with the weight of its massive frame, yet it moved with purpose. The radar glow pulsed in Carter's eyes, each sweep marking the enemy's location with growing certainty. "Their navigator must think the sky is empty tonight," Carter muttered. Howell's reply was calm. "Let's prove him wrong." The blip increased in size. The distance narrowed. Howell dimmed the cockpit lights, letting his pupils widen. He searched for any sign of the enemy. A flicker of exhaust, a silhouette against the clouds. Nothing appeared. The darkness held steady, as if trying to protect the German bomber from its fate. Carter spoke again. "We're inside a mile. They still haven't seen us." Hill tensed, gripping the turret controls. The Black Widow's 4 20mm cannons sat fixed under the belly, silent but ready. Howell angled the aircraft to bring them into optimal position. The enemy was close, very close, but still invisible. And that was the point. The Ju-88 droned ahead, drifting through the night with a steady confidence rooted in years of Luftwaffe dominance after sunset. Inside its cockpit, Oberleutnant Franz Müller adjusted his trim, unaware of the predator tightening the noose around him. The radio operator leaned back, listening to quiet static. The rear gunner scanned the black void behind them, his eyes straining for shapes his instincts told him would not be there. For the Germans, darkness had always been their shield. Carter watched as the blip grew brighter and more defined. "Range 0.7, angle good. They still have no clue." Howell steadied his breathing. His hands rested lightly on the controls, guiding the heavy fighter through the dark with the calculated patience of a hunter. The P-61's engines hummed like an immense heartbeat, steady and powerful. The smell of warm metal and electrical ozone clung to the cockpit air, every sense sharpened. Hill crouched forward in the turret, adjusting elevation by the smallest increments. He strained to see outside, though sight would tell him nothing. Tonight, his world depended entirely on Carter's radar. Carter gave the first decisive call. "Visual expected at any moment. They're almost directly ahead." Howell leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The clouds shifted in thin streaks across the horizon. A faint, barely perceptible glimmer appeared. Not a shape, not a silhouette. Just a slight interruption in the darkness where something absorbed starlight differently. "There," Howell whispered. He eased the throttle, sliding the P-61 into perfect alignment. The Ju-88 grew clearer, its twin engines faintly glowing with heat. Still, the Germans flew steady, unhurried, untouched by any suspicion. Then the first sign of doubt flickered in the Ju-88's tail. The rear gunner shifted abruptly, pressing his face closer to his sight. Perhaps he caught a whisper of engine noise. Perhaps his instincts prickled with the knowledge that quiet skies could turn deadly without warning. But he still saw nothing. Inside the Black Widow, Carter announced the moment. "Range point 4, you're lined up." Howell placed his thumbs on the firing controls. "Ready." Hill tightened his grip, though he knew the first strike belonged to the cannons mounted in the belly. The P-61 carried enough firepower to tear through a bomber in seconds. 4 20mm Hispano cannons, 4 50 caliber machine guns, a night fighter built not for intimidation, but execution. The P-61 slid even closer. Darkness wrapped the two aircraft like a stage curtain. Only one of them knew the scene unfolding. Mueller, inside the Ju-88, finally sensed something wrong. His head snapped left, then right. He listened. Waited. He turned to his radio operator. "Do you hear that?" The operator shook his head. "Just wind." But the gunner now gripped his weapon tighter. His breath quickened. Something lurked there. Something unseen. Too late. Howell pressed the trigger. The cannons beneath the P-61 erupted with a deep, rolling thunder that shattered the silent sky. Flashes of fire tore through the darkness. Tracers stitched a path toward the German bomber's left engine. Inside the Ju-88, everything exploded into motion. Metal clanged violently as the first shells struck. The wings shook under the impact. Mueller yanked the control column instinctively, sending the bomber lurching into a desperate dive. The gunner swung his weapon back and unleashed a burst into empty space, firing at shadows. Carter watched the radar smear as the sudden movement disrupted its echo signature. "They're diving. You hit something hard." Howell banked smoothly, refusing to let the bomber slip away. The P-61 stayed glued to the Ju-88's tail as if the aircraft were tethered by an invisible cord. Hill swiveled his turret, waiting for his angle. "Bring me 2 degrees right," he called. Howell adjusted. The rear gunner in the Ju-88 fired again, tracers whipping uselessly past the Black Widow. He still could not see his attacker. There was only darkness and the feeling of death closing in. The P-61 closed for a second strike. Howell steadied the Black Widow behind the diving Ju-88, its silhouette now a trembling shadow barely visible against the night. Flames flickered along the bomber's damaged left engine, illuminating pieces of torn metal vibrating violently in the slipstream. Yet Mueller fought to regain control. The German pilot wrestled the stick, teeth clenched, eyes burning as he tried to stabilize the aircraft long enough to escape into the darkness that had always kept him safe. Inside the P-61, Carter tracked the Ju-88's erratic movements on the radar screen. The echoes streaked and blurred as the bomber twisted. "They're losing altitude fast. Still on heading. Still alive." Hill exhaled sharply and adjusted his turret another inch. Sweat dripped into his collar, cold against his skin. "I've got partial angle. Give me 5 seconds." Howell responded with a shallow bank, smoothing the approach, keeping the P-61 tight behind its target. The night wrapped around the aircraft like a cocoon, broken only by the thin, wavering glow from the burning engine ahead. Inside the Ju-88, panic smothered discipline. Mueller barked at his crew. "Jettison weight! Stabilize her! Now!" Loose equipment clattered to the floor. The radio operator struggled with his controls. The navigator slammed his palm against a compass trembling from vibration. The gunner swung wildly in his turret, firing bursts at the darkness behind them. The tracers streaked harmlessly into empty sky, illuminating nothing, finding nothing. He shouted over the intercom, voice shaking. "I still don't see them. I can't see anything." Howell pressed closer. The damaged Ju-88 began leveling slightly, Mueller forcing the heavy bomber to respond. He knew he could not outrun a twin-engine night fighter built specifically for pursuit. But perhaps he could force a turn into the clouds. Perhaps he could shake whatever monster stalked them. The bomber tilted left. Carter's voice cut through the intercom. "They're banking, trying to break contact." Howell tightened his grip. "Not happening." He matched the bank perfectly. The P-61 followed like a shadow, adhering to its target's every movement. Hill felt the turret align. "Hold that, I've got him." The gunner squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber machine guns roared. The turret flashed with bursts of fire. Tracers ripped forward, stitching across the Ju-88's tail. Inside the German bomber, chaos erupted. The tail section shuddered under the impact. Metal sheared away in strips. The gunner's oxygen mask snapped against his cheek as he jerked in his harness. His weapon jammed. Sparks danced across the floor as fragments of the tail assembly tore free. Mueller's voice cracked over the intercom. "Damage to control surfaces. Response sluggish." The bomber rolled, dipped, and fought against Mueller's efforts to keep it stable. Flames climbed along the engine nacelle. Smoke poured from vents, trailing behind like a dark comet against the night sky. Carter watched the radar return distort again. "They're bleeding speed. Dropping altitude. They won't last." Howell eased the P-61 even closer. The smell of cordite still hung in the cockpit. The Black Widow felt like a living creature now, relentless in its pursuit, heavy and controlled, its engines pounding like a drumbeat, announcing the end of its prey. Below them, wisps of cloud drifted upward. The Ju-88 attempted another desperate turn, but its damaged tail couldn't hold. The aircraft wobbled violently, almost stalling. Hill leaned forward. "Finish it." Howell brought the P-61 into firing position once more. His thumb hovered over the controls. Ahead, Mueller realized he was moments from being overtaken. He made a final, instinctive move. The Ju-88 dove hard into the clouds. Darkness swallowed it whole. The Ju-88 vanished into the cloud bank as if the night itself had swallowed it in a single breath. One moment the bomber's burning engine glowed like an ember drifting through the dark, and the next it was gone, consumed by a rolling wall of vapor dense enough to erase shapes, shadows, even sound. The P-61 plunged after it without hesitation. Moisture streaked across Howell's canopy. The world outside dissolved into a gray void. He lost all natural references. No stars, no horizon, no silhouette of the German aircraft. The only certainty came from the steady hum of the engines and the rapid sweep of the radar beam. Carter gripped the edges of the radar screen. "Stand by. I'm reacquiring." Their dive distorted the echo. Static flashes pulsed across the scope. The cloud density thickened the signal returns, creating a noisy smear that made tracking dangerous. Howell kept his breathing even, guiding the aircraft on instruments alone. Inside the Ju-88, the crew slammed through turbulent air. Mueller fought to keep the nose level, sweat running down his spine as he realized the clouds were his only hope. The damaged tail juddered, threatening to send them into a spiral. The fire along the engine flickered as the wind forced its way through the nacelle. The gunner, trembling, searched behind again, but found nothing except the suffocating gray. Carter tapped the side of the scope, adjusting frequency. Echo returning, small, distorted. But it's them. They're still in front of us. Hill whispered, almost to himself. They think they're safe in there. Howell steadied the P-61, letting the instruments lead. The altimeter spun downward as the clouds pressed around the aircraft like a cold, wet shroud. Every vibration, every shift in airflow mattered now. Pursuing a wounded bomber blind was dangerous, but turning back was never an option. Carter's voice sharpened. Contact stabilized. They're descending at a steep angle, speed dropping. They're losing control. Inside the Ju-88, Mueller felt the controls stiffen. The bomber shuddered. The left engine sputtered with a hollow cough. He forced the aircraft level, muscles trembling with the effort. The radio operator shouted over the rising noise. Altitude critical. We must pull up. Mueller slammed the throttle, trying to coax power from the dying engine. The aircraft responded unevenly, climbing only slightly before sagging again. Back in the P-61, Carter called out the updated range. Closing to point 3, they're breaking out of the cloud in about 5 seconds. Prepare visual. Howell lowered the nose just enough to cut through the cloud bank. Moisture streamed along the cockpit glass. The gray began thinning. Shapes started to form. The night opened gradually, peeling away the mist layer by layer. Hill gripped the turret handles, eyes locked forward. Come on, show yourself. The P-61 burst through the last veil of cloud. There, only 200 yards ahead, the Ju-88 emerged, barely holding together. Flames licked along the nacelle. Smoke poured from vented panels. The bomber wobbled like a wounded animal, staggering toward an inevitable fall. Mueller saw the stars again and realized they had failed him. As soon as they broke free of the clouds, the silence of the sky betrayed the truth. The Black Widow followed them out like a specter. Hill reacted first. Target in the open, clear shot. But before Howell could fire, the Ju-88 suddenly pitched downward. Mueller had lost control. The bomber dropped in a sharp, uncontrolled descent, plunging toward the shadowed countryside below. Howell adjusted immediately, refusing to let the target escape even in its death spiral. Stay on them, he muttered. Carter tracked the descent on radar. They're dropping too fast. If they don't recover soon, they're done. The Ju-88 continued to fall. The crew inside the bomber felt the crushing force of gravity as the ground rushed upward. And the Black Widow, unwavering, dove after them. The Black Widow plunged into the descent with the same grim certainty as a hawk falling on a wounded bird. Howell pushed the nose down, feeling the weight of the aircraft resist before the engine surged and pulled them into the dive. The altimeter numbers blurred downward. Air pressed hard against the canopy. The frame vibrated as the P-61 matched the Ju-88's uncontrolled drop. Carter kept his eyes locked on the flickering radar echo. They're losing altitude at a catastrophic rate. Angle steepening. They're seconds from impact if they don't pull out. Below, the Dutch countryside emerged through breaks in the cloud. Dark fields spread out like a patchwork of shadows. Occasional farmhouses appeared as faint rectangles, barely distinguishable from the surrounding terrain. What had once been a safe haven of night now looked like a cold, unwelcoming surface, rushing closer. Inside the Ju-88, Mueller pulled with every ounce of strength he had left. Stabilize. Stabilize now. His voice cracked. The bomber shuddered violently as the damaged control surfaces protested. The tail section groaned. Sparks spat from wiring along the floor. The radio operator braced himself, his knuckles white, breath heaving through the mask. The gunner, thrown hard against the turret frame, shouted in fear. We're not pulling up. Franz, we're not pulling up. But Mueller refused to surrender. He pulled again, harder. Muscles burned. The bomber trembled under the strain, and inch by inch, the aircraft began to respond. The nose lifted slightly. The descent softened. The scream of air outside shifted pitch. Hill watched the struggle unfold ahead of them. "They're trying to save it," he muttered. "He's fighting that thing with everything he's got." Howell kept the P-61 perfectly aligned behind the bomber. He could see the flames licking along the wing. He could see the erratic flutter of the damaged rudder. He could see the desperation. But he also knew desperation did not change outcomes in the night sky. Carter's voice came steady through the intercom. "Range point 2. If they level out, they'll try for terrain masking. This is your window." The Ju-88 leveled further. The dive became a shallow, trembling glide. Smoke trailed behind like a long black banner stretching across the night. Howell set his jaw. "Taking the shot." He moved his thumb toward the firing switch just as the Ju-88 banked weakly to the right, attempting one final evasive action. The maneuver was sluggish, unbalanced, almost pitiable. The bomber's wounded left engine backfired with a deep, hollow cough. Hill adjusted the turret. "Angle good. We're still on them." The P-61 drifted into the sweet spot behind the enemy bomber. Perfect range, perfect alignment. Nowhere left for the Germans to run. Inside the Ju-88, Mueller caught a flicker of movement behind them, a glint of metal, the faint outline of a predatory shape finally revealed by the return of starlight. His breath froze. He understood then. Whatever hunted them had always been there, even when the sky was blind. "Enemy at our 6, he shouted. "Brace for—" The night erupted. Howell squeezed the trigger. The P-61's cannons fired in a deafening rolling roar that shattered the quiet below. Streams of fire cut through the darkness and buried themselves into the Ju-88's fuselage. The rounds ripped through the right wing root, tearing wires, rupturing fuel lines, blasting holes through the bomber's spine. Inside the Ju-88, the crew was thrown violently in their seats as the aircraft jolted under the impact. Panels burst open. Flames surged from the struck wing. The right engine flared bright, then detonated with a hollow, booming flash that lit the clouds from below. The shockwave rocked the P-61. Howell held firm. Hill steadied his turret, eyes locked forward. Carter watched the radar echo fracture into chaotic fragments. The Ju-88 rolled sharply, fire eating through its structure. The bomber spiraled downward, trailing burning debris that fell like meteors toward the fields below. Mueller shouted something unintelligible as the cockpit filled with smoke and flame. The bomber was dying, and gravity was dragging it toward the earth. The Ju-88's spiral tightened into a burning corkscrew, each rotation throwing fragments of metal into the night. Flames trailed behind like a comet's tail, illuminating the fuselage in violent flashes. The crew inside had no more control, no more options, no more sky left to use. The bomber plunged toward the dark landscape with the inevitability of a falling star. Howell eased off the throttle just enough to avoid overshooting. "Keep eyes on it. They're going in." Carter confirmed with a steady tone, though the radar echo was already disintegrating. "Signal breaking apart. They're not recovering from that." Below, the field stretched out in a vast, shadowed plain. A few isolated farmhouses glimmered faint yellow from oil lamps inside. Small canals cut through the terrain like black ribbons. The bomber fell between these landmarks, spinning violently, each rotation bringing it closer to the ground. Inside the Ju-88, Mueller felt the last shreds of lift vanish beneath the wings. He tasted smoke with every breath. His vision blurred. He reached for the controls one last time, a reflex rather than a strategy. knowing the aircraft would not respond. The gunner, thrown sideways in his seat, clung to a structural beam. His voice trembled. "Franz, I can't see. I can't." The radio operator tried to send a final distress call, but the equipment sparked and died in his hands. Their voices faded, swallowed by the roar of fire and wind as the bomber spun downward. Above them, the P-61 held steady. Hill watched through the gun sight, silent now. The cloud layers drifted past, the night calm despite the violence below. The Black Widow flew like a cold, dark sentinel overseeing the final descent of its prey. The Ju-88 struck ground. The impact was a violent blossom of orange and white light, a burst that lit the fields for miles and threw debris in every direction. The explosion rolled upward in a towering plume that briefly silhouetted the P-61, highlighting the aircraft's angular shape against the sky. Flames spread across the grass, flickering in uneven patterns as metal rained down in smoldering fragments. Hill exhaled. Target destroyed. Carter watched the last shards of radar clutter fade into nothing. Negative returns. They're gone. Howell maintained altitude, scanning the horizon even though he knew there were no more threats from that bomber. The night around them remained vast and indifferent. The same darkness that once shielded the Luftwaffe, now serving as the stage for its defeat. He adjusted the throttle, letting the P-61 climb gently back toward patrol altitude. The engines hummed with steady confidence. The aircraft felt unshaken, its heavy frame absorbing the earlier turbulence with ease. Hill broke the silence again. "That crew didn't stand a chance. They never even saw us." Carter replied without looking up. "That's the point. They were flying blind. We weren't." Howell kept his eyes forward, scanning the dark horizon. They relied on darkness. Darkness failed them. The mission was not over. They had more sky to cover, more enemy activity to block, more bomber routes to patrol. And the night, once a sanctuary for German crews, now belonged to a machine built for exactly this kind of silent dominance. Howell keyed the mic. "Control, this is Widow 3. Splash 1 Ju-88, continuing patrol." A burst of static answered, followed by the ground controller's calm reply. "Widow 3, copy. Resume sector coverage. New activity reported northeast. Stand by for vectors." Howell glanced at Carter. "Get ready. Looks like we're not done tonight." The radar operator adjusted his controls, bringing the scanner to full sensitivity. The screen glowed faintly, waiting for the next echo. Hill reset the turret and wiped the sweat from his brow. The Black Widow turned toward its new heading, gliding smoothly through the night. The countryside below dimmed again, returning to its natural darkness as the flames of the crashed bomber sank lower and lower into the earth. The hunter moved on. The P-61's true arrival in Europe came in May 1944, when the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron received its first operational Widows. Ground crews gathered around the unfamiliar aircraft, brushing their hands across the glossy obsidian skin. Pilots who had flown the British Beaufighter or the aging P-70 immediately noticed the differences. The P-61 felt intentionally predatory. Inside the cockpit, the green glow of the SCR-720 radar scope illuminated the faces of pilot and radar operator. They trained for hours, tracking simulated targets, hunting friendly aircraft during practice interceptions, and learning how to guide the P-61 into attack position without ever seeing the enemy with their own eyes. Outside the cockpit, German pilots still scoffed. Luftwaffe intelligence reports claimed the P-61 was too large for night combat, and that its radar made it vulnerable to interference. But as summer advanced toward the firestorms of July 1944, RAF Bomber Command prepared to unleash massive raids on the industrial Ruhr and the synthetic fuel heartlands of Germany. Nachtjagdgruppen sharpened their claws, expecting easy nighttime kills. They didn't see the danger sweeping toward them, a silent, black-winged hunter born from American engineering obsession.